Welcome, everyone. Feel free to continue letting us know in the chat where you're calling in from and what your connection is to wolves and dogs. Um, so, again, my name is Kristen Weiss. I'm the Wildlife and Forest Campaigner here at Pacific Wild. Um, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our organization and our work with wolves, and then I'll introduce our two amazing guest speakers, and we'll get into some good discussion. Let's switch over to my slideshow here. All right, so for those of you who aren't so familiar with Pacific Wild, we are a nonprofit. We're based in British Columbia, Canada. We work kind of throughout the Pacific Northwest, the Great Bear Rainforest, which is an amazing coastal temperate rainforest in this region. And we also kind of expand out from there. We are focused on supporting biodiversity conservation and protection of these ecosystems that contain some of the last ancient old growth forests in the area and some of the amazing keystone species here, including grizzly bears, black bears, birds of prey, and of course, wolves. So we focus on both marine and land-based campaigns. In the past, we've helped work on a grizzly bear trophy hunting ban, which was pretty incredible in 2018 that went into place. But wolves are still hunted in British Columbia. And as probably most of you on this call know, wolves are persecuted for various reasons across North America, which is, we'll hear a bit more about that today. Um, in British Columbia, one of the key threats to wolves actually is the government's taxpayer-funded wolf cull. So the government hunts and kills approximately 300 wolves a year. They've been doing this for 10 years. So it's been almost 3,000 wolves now have been killed to supposedly protect caribou populations, which are in huge decline due to the loss of their habitat. So they rely on old growth forests. Those forests are being logged, mined, oil and gas extraction is happening. And meanwhile, the government is paying to kill wolves. So that's a big focus for us here at Pacific Wild. That's one of our key campaigns. In other parts of North America, of course, wolves are persecuted more so for their conflict or presumed conflict with ranchers and farmers. So that's something you see more so in the US. It's a really big issue right now in Colorado, Wyoming, these areas, California as well. So really, we're focused on protecting wolves from all of these threats. And in our region in particular, in addition, it's about this caribou recovery and this kind of misaligned management approach. So wolves, I'll actually show in the next slide here, used to have a really wide range across North America. We still find them across most of Canada. It's hard to get an accurate population estimate of wolves, but there's potentially around 60,000 in Canadian borders. In the US, their range has become very, very constricted. You can see by the map, they're really only found in this really small portion of their historic range. And I think the estimate is around maybe up to 6,000 wolves in that area. Alaska still has a much larger population because it's obviously there's a lot more habitat there for them, but they're still persecuted in all of these areas. So part of our motivation for events like this webinar is to have these larger discussions around wolves and behavior and our understanding of wolves and to try to help promote coexistence so that we can reduce this persecution and increase protection of wolves, but also understanding amongst people. So this is just some great video from the coastal sea wolves here in British Columbia. They're called the coastal or sea wolves because they have some different behaviors from living along the coasts of British Columbia. They rely heavily on food from the ocean, so fish, marine mammals, invertebrates. But just like gray wolves everywhere, they are very social. highly intelligent, work together in packs to hunt and to find food, to scavenge, and they take care of each other. They're often in these family units of 5 to 10 wolves, and an alpha female typically is the one to have pups each year and has a den, and her family members will bring her food so she can take care of the pups. There's just really interesting behaviors there. And a lot of those behaviors remind us of our dogs, our companions at home, right? So it's really interesting to look at what are the similarities and then also what are the differences between these animals, which we'll talk about today as well. So right now, what we're doing at Pacific Wild, we have a campaign to try to protect BC wolves and to support wolf conservation more broadly. We have been advocating for an end to the government's wolf cull. They have proposed to extend it for another 5 years, even though the core habitat of caribou continues to be destroyed through logging and mining and road building. So we're advocating for habitat protection and habitat restoration instead of killing wolves. And you can find a lot more information about that on our website. We'll share that in the chat, and I'll also share some more ways that you can get involved at the end of this webinar. So just before I move on to introducing our guests, I just wanted to let you know that we're really excited to host events like this because one of the things we want to do is be able to bring scientists, advocates, artists, conservationists together, right, to talk about the situation with wolves, to understand, like I said, their behavior, their genetics, wildlife management issues, conservation issues, and be able to talk about science and ethics. So it's really exciting to bring in experts to have these conversations and then to learn how we can take action from there to help protect wildlife. So, just one thing that we are doing, which is kind of connected to the theme of today's webinar, on August 13th, we're hosting a dog walk for wolves. So, this is something that any of you can participate in no matter where you're at. We will host a flagship event here in Victoria, where our office is located. But you can do this with a group of friends or family. And you can use that QR code to go to our event page to learn more. But basically, we're encouraging folks to come together, have a great dog walk, walk with their dogs and friends, and maybe have some signs or talk about what wolf conservation means. What are the issues facing wolves in your region, and what can you do to speak up and spread awareness about these issues? So we're very excited about that. Um, Hope you'll learn more. And yeah, excited to share more ways for you all to take action too. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and I am very excited to introduce our two guests today. So I'm going to do a very short introduction to both of them and then allow them to speak some more and share a bit more about themselves. So um, first, we have with us Dr. Kathryn Lord, and she is a research specialist in the Carlson Lab that's at the University of Massachusetts, the Chan Medical School, and also affiliated with the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard. And so, one of her key research interests is the evolution and development of animal behavior with a special focus on canids, which is why she's here today. So, Kathryn's work is centered around finding this deeper understanding of how genes and environment interact to allow for rapid evolution, particularly in human environments. So, she's published on topics including evolution of the seasonality in the genus Canis, the function of barking in mammals and birds. Interesting. And primary critical period of socialization in dogs and wolves, which I'm sure she'll speak more about. So I'll turn it over to Kathryn in a moment. Our other amazing guest today is Anjali Ranadive. Did I say that? Close? um, Anjali is the founder and executive director of Women for Wolves. So she leads the organization's work in all sorts of things. They do amazing wildlife conservation, policy advocacy, research, education, and outreach. And she does this with her co-founder, Rena. And she's also heavily involved in wolf dog rescue and runs a wolf dog sanctuary in California. So she helps to raise awareness about the special challenges and needs associated with wolf dogs. So we'll talk about that today as well. So she founded Women for Wolves with this goal of inspiring young people and increasing female leadership in conservation, which is so critical, and also obviously advocating for protection of these misunderstood species like wolves. So, two incredible individuals here today. I'm very excited to hear from them. So, with that, I'll turn it over to you first, Kathryn, for a little more of an introduction.
Let me see if I can share my screen real quick. Inevitably, there it is. All right. Um, so I was just going to really quick give you kind of an overview of the sorts of things that I've done over the years. I started doing work looking at how the environment interacted with early development. Specifically, I was looking at dogs and guide dogs usually, and trying to figure out how can we create an environment that allows them to succeed at their job. But I was more broadly interested in how we could do this with mammals in general, whether they were animals in captivity being released out into the wild or working animals or what have you. And so I started very much on the environmental end of things and development. And then, both because of what I found from that research, since there was actually a lot of variation in what worked for different animals, and also just from my own studies, I moved on to look at differences in early development between dogs and wolves. So they have really different behaviors, as I'm sure you're aware, and yet genetically they're very similar, so similar that they can reproduce and have fertile offspring. So we get those wolf dogs. But we don't really know why they have so many differences, how they're able to do that with so little genetic change. So I was interested in their early development and whether that might be a good way to get at that. And so after figuring out some interesting early developmental differences in the last decade, I've been in the Carlson lab trying to connect genetics to that difference in early development and ultimately difference in behavior. And so I go around doing the same sorts of things, but now collecting genetics, which we usually do with wolf pups and dog pups with saliva. So there's going to be collecting some saliva samples from a large litter of wolf pups. And then also we've been doing this with adult wolf dogs. And so this is us collecting some fur samples for, again, genetic studies. Sometimes we can get saliva samples. The owners can do that. Sometimes they can't. And when they can't, we put up fur traps. This is just a choke chain used for a much better purpose, I think. So we basically put it through the bars here and spritz it with a little perfume and get them to scent rub on it. And then we take the fur off of those prongs and run it for sequencing. So that's just kind of a little overview, and I will pass it off to Anjali here. I will stop sharing.
Here, I'm going to share my screen now too. Sorry. So I unfortunately don't have videos right now for you guys, but these are some photos from some of the work that we do at Women for Wolves. Just to give you guys some background, we are a conservation organization, as Kristen said. Also, Kristen, thank you so much for putting this together, and thank you, Pacific Wild. We're super honored to be a part of this, so thank you. But yeah, we are a conservation organization, and we work to advocate for wild wolves and also help everybody be an advocate for wildlife. So our mission really is to have wolves be the bridge between protecting wildlife and just, advocating in general. So we want to make it really accessible, whether it's just from your living room, whether it's signing a petition. So that is our mission, is to get every single person involved in protecting wildlife. And how that started was back in 2013 when I was in college. I went to Cal Berkeley. I kind of saw that there was a need when I was studying conservation for women and for young people and for just the everyday person, right, to get involved in protecting wildlife. I see conservation as a space that isn't just for scientists or just for policymakers, but for everybody. And dogs are a really great example of how people start to care about nature and wildlife, and wolves as well. So the idea was really to create something that would bring people together to advocate, to get involved in policy, to go to public comments. So we started that. And then when I rescued a wolf dog from the shelter, her name was Diamond, and she totally changed my life. I was going through mental health struggles of my own, and just rescuing her honestly rescued me. And I saw I had this aha moment in realizing that this was so much bigger than just advocating for nature, saving animals, protecting wolves, right? It was saving me, it was saving ourselves. And so that's kind of the mission behind Women for Wolves. And we changed our name for Women to Women for Wolves because when we started rescuing wolf dogs, when we started our sanctuary, it was women. It was women who were showing up to advocate, showing up at the Capitol to speak on behalf of wolves and volunteer for wolf dogs at our sanctuary. So that was the, reasoning behind changing our name and kind of catering our mission. But we also do a lot of education with youth groups. So you can see in some of the photos here, we have a lot of Indigenous partnerships because Indigenous stewardship is a very important staple and pillar for us at Women for Wolves because there's no conservation without Indigenous leadership. So those are some of the programs that we have. And right now we are working on California wolf coexistence and recovery. So wolves are back in California. They returned naturally for the first time in almost 100 years after being eradicated post-colonization. And so luckily they came back on their own, and there's an estimated 13 packs in California, which is really exciting. But of course, as everyone here knows, wolves are polarizing. They are loved and they are hated. And so there have been a lot of conflict, obstacles in safeguarding their recovery. But what we're doing at Women for Wolves is a coexistence project. So we just got back from the field yesterday in interviewing ranchers and working on non-lethal techniques, figuring out what works, figuring out what people are willing to try, and how, most importantly, how we can help. Because really conservation is about coming together. And so that's kind of our mission right now, is seeing how we can help California wolves. And we're on a couple of bills too for wildlife coexistence, which I'm sure we'll, get into policy aspects and things later. But yeah, that's kind of the overall gist of what we are working on right now. We're really focused on coexistence as a whole. So yeah.
Thank you both. That's amazing, Anjali. So I have so many questions for both of you, and I'm going to try to restrain myself. I'll go back and forth. I have a few questions for each of you and then some for both of you. And then I also encourage all of our viewers, if you have questions for the panelists, please put those in the Q&A, and I'll try to pick out some of those towards the end. And if we don't get to all of them, I can also try to have a follow-up answering some of those questions with an email. And we'll also email the recording of this webinar to everyone who registered. Um, so I guess just to start out, Kathryn, I would love to hear a little more in detail about your research. So you explained a bit about what you've been looking at and finding, and I'm wondering if you could explain to us a bit more about maybe some of the assumptions that you've been looking at around the evolution from wolves to dogs, and some of the research that you've been working on that's maybe upended some of those assumptions, or some surprises that you found along the way and things that you're hoping to still uncover.
Sure, yeah. I guess the big one is the whole idea of us domesticating dogs. So how did dogs evolve in the first place? Generally, people come from the idea that humans domesticated them on purpose. And there's a hypothesis that was made popular by actually originally my advisor, Raymond Coppinger, that actually dogs just were taking advantage of an environment that humans created. So when enough humans got in one place, we create garbage. That's something we're really good at. And that is a fantastic resource. So it's a whole bunch of food. So garbage and refuse. And dogs basically evolved to take advantage of that new resource. And they didn't need us to do a darn thing for them to become dogs. And once they were dogs, then their relationship with us started to get closer in some places. And then we start to have, dogs doing jobs or things like that. And then eventually in the last 150 years or so, we actually have people breeding dogs into what we call breeds. But most dogs, even today, aren't those dogs. Most dogs, even today, the vast majority of them, around upwards of over 80% of the world's dogs, still live in that original environment, just eating our garbage and refuse and doing really good at it. So good that we try to get rid of them and they just come right back. So I think that's probably the biggest one that most of my research is sort of founded on top of. So looking at dogs from that evolutionary perspective rather than from a perspective of either humans creating them or even there's a lot of psychology work out that's great. But my work's really from this evolutionary perspective. So I think that's probably the founding sort of assumption that I'm going against. And then since then, pretty much all my work has kind of been trying to work against assumptions that we already have about dogs and wolves and trying to test those assumptions and see what we actually come up with. So, yeah, that's a short version.
Thanks. Just to follow up on that, would you be able to explain a bit more about what you feel is the most significant kind of takeaway in this wolf to dog transition, based on your research? And why do you feel like this evolutionary story matters? Why is it so interesting and compelling?
Yeah, so that I think the answer for that has shifted over the years, why it's so compelling. And there's so many reasons I think it's really interesting. But sort of the overarching, I think, easiest one to grab a hold of is that with dogs and wolves, we have this really interesting system. We have two animals who are really closely related, so closely related that they can interbreed and have fertile offspring, which in some cases is the definition of a species. So they are so
Mhm.
recently diverged that they can still do that, which is sort of amazing. And yet they've evolved to these two very different environments. One, the wolf has evolved to survive eating and hunting large ungulates and be as far away from us as possible. Dogs have evolved to be scavengers, scavenging off of human created environments. And they need us to survive. They don't need us to take care of them, but they need us to create that
Mm.
garbage. If we don't create the garbage, they're out of luck. They can't survive. So they've, as far as their evolutionary trajectories, they've gone in opposite directions in terms of us, right? In terms of what they can deal with as far as human disturbance. And when you think about us, we, in some ways, aren't that exciting. If this is just normal evolution, we're just a part of it. But in another way, we are impacting the world just in every way possible, everywhere possible, right? So if we look across the living world, things that are alive either have to get on board and deal with us successfully and survive, or stick with the being far away from us and go extinct. Those are just kind of the two trajectories right now. Some are kind of in the middle and taking advantage, but they don't need us. And some really need us. Some just can't handle us and they're disappearing. And so I think that why that's happening, why some animals are able to do that and some aren't, is at its base a really interesting and important question right now, not only just for scientific interest, but also because if we can figure out why some animals can deal with this or why some organisms can deal with this, we might be able to also
Mm.
help those that aren't, right? What is it that do they need more time? Does it just that they need that environment and there's nothing else? Is there something else going on that we can maybe even identify animals or regions that are going to be a problem before it becomes a problem? So I think that is sort of the bigger overarching question that I think is super important and that we can really use dogs and wolves to answer. They've already done it. All the other organisms are dealing with it now, but they did it a long time ago. So we can kind of use them to answer a lot of these cool questions.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really important point. I like that. It really does connect to the bigger picture of our influence on the world and other species. And I like that you said too that in some cases species need us. I think sometimes people who are more on the conservation side feel like humans just are destroying everything and it'd be better if we didn't exist. But really, in some ways we have a lot of reciprocity with other species and ecosystems. So focusing on that and looking at how can we make that a more positive relationship could be really useful. So thank you. Okay, I'll shift to Anjali for my next question. So, on this topic of, wolves versus dogs and the fact that they're, so closely related, they're considered pretty much the same species. We have the wolf dog, which you talked about, and I'm curious, it's such a specific challenge or series of challenges that arise with wolf dogs. I'm curious, what are some of the misconceptions that you've encountered from the public and folks who have tried to have wolf dogs as pets? And what do you see as really important for people to take away about wolf dogs and also maybe wolves if you've done wolf rescue as well, and how people can help and maybe have a better relationship with those animals?
Yeah, I could probably talk the whole webinar about the misconceptions because there are so many. One that just kind of came to mind as you were asking that was one that it kind of makes me laugh sometimes because a lot of people, if they are interested in adopting an animal that we rescue that is available or can potentially be, very suited for a home, sometimes they will say, I really want a guard dog, and I feel like a wolf dog would be perfect, or a wolf would be perfect, and I just laugh because it's like if there's a burglar in your home and a wolf dog is there, the wolf dog's gonna leave you, like they're gonna go hide because they are more fearful of people. And I think
Hmm.
that is obviously a similarity with wolves as well, right? Kathryn said it. They are, biologically they stay away from people. It's really hard to go see a wild wolf anywhere, so even in Yellowstone, you have to look through a scope and you're lucky if you see them from a mile or two away, right? So I think that's just one misconception, and that is really prominent in wolf dogs as well. They are stuck between two worlds. So, they have wild wolf DNA and they have domestic dog DNA. And so what we've seen with a lot of rescues is they end up falling through the cracks. They end up being misunderstood. They end up getting surrendered, abused, neglected, abandoned because people don't understand them. They don't understand their needs. They don't understand that they aren't a regular dog and they do need special diets. They do need specialized yards and containment and fencing, and they need certain things to be safe and secure that dogs don't necessarily need, and then they have that kind of conflicting identity crisis. Oftentimes, a lot of the wolf dogs that we rescue, we see that they're mixed with multiple breeds as well. So it's adding an additional layer. You have an animal that might have some Malamute or Husky, and Huskies love to run, and then they might have German Shepherd DNA that comes with a whole other set of elements and personality traits. Some even have Coyote mixed in. So we have or three wolf dogs that are coyote, wolf, and dog, and so it's really hard because if people are not experienced or if people have not done research or understood animal behavior, had experience with northern breeds, volunteered at a wolf dog sanctuary, done their due diligence, which, I mean, unfortunately, 99% of the time they don't, it's really difficult. So it's
Yeah.
not an exact stat on this, but some wolf sanctuaries have estimated that 90% of wolf dogs get euthanized in America. And we have gotten a lot of our surrenders, their age usually ends up being 1 to 2 years old because I think that's when people realize they're in over their head, or they don't, maybe the wolf dog doesn't belong in an apartment where the person is working 9-hour days, and oftentimes they can be a full-time job, so there's just a lot of elements there. I think that wolf dogs are a good example and a symbol for just how we've treated animals in general, how we've treated the wilds. It's almost like, with people, we want to make money off of everything. We want to commodify everything. We want to, if it doesn't serve a purpose, then it's not useful for us. So I think wolf dogs kind of are an example of that. And they
Mm.
really are part wild, and part domestic. So yeah, I mean, we at Women for Wolves, we are fully against wolf dog breeding because we have seen so many animals suffering. So many animals get euthanized every single day in the world. And so yeah, I mean, it is a really difficult, it's a difficult topic and it's a difficult situation, and they are caught between both worlds. I think the biggest takeaway is just for people in general to, look into adopting. That's one, versus buying from a breeder for any animal. And also just to like respect the wild, let the wild be
Mm.
wild. We don't need to, create something just for our own benefit.
Yeah, definitely so important. Can you also clarify, is breeding wolf dogs legal? Are there restrictions? Like, does it depend on where you're at? Some folks
Depends on
are
where you are.
wondering.
Yeah, it depends on
Okay.
where you are. I mean, even per state, there's different
Mm,
counties that allow it. And in California, it's illegal in Yolo County, for example, but then it'll be legal in Sacramento County or, somewhere else. So it depends on the situation, the county, the region. Also, sometimes they go by percentage, if it's less than
mm,
25% or over 25%, so yeah, there's a lot of different rules and laws in different areas for sure.
yeah. Thank you. Um, I guess building off of that, Kathryn, something I'm really interested in that you've looked at in your research is some of the really early in life behavioral differences between wolves and dogs. And I'm wondering if you could just speak a bit more to that because I find it really fascinating.
Yeah, sure. So you mentioned the primary critical period of socialization. It's a
Yeah.
mouthful, but so a lot of my work is looking at that period of development. So it's a time period for those who aren't familiar with it. It's a time period early in the life of all birds and mammals, where the brain is just developing very rapidly, and the way that that happens is basically you're born, wolves, dogs, us are born with all of the neurons, most of the neurons we're ever going to have. And the brain grows by making connections and pruning connections between those neurons. And the shape of the brain then determines behavior. So how that pruning and growth happens is based on the information coming in through the senses. And so basically what they experience changes the shape of their brain, just like us. And there was a lot of research in the 50s and 60s on this time period in dogs. If you read it all, and I think what people hear now gets very confused because if you read it all, they change their definitions and timing of everything. Even one, like if you just look at Scott, who's one of the biggest names in the field, you look at his old work and he changes his mind about the timing of the period like every other paper. But if you put it all together into a bunch, you basically figure out that it starts with the ability to walk and explore, which makes sense because that's when they're starting to really take stuff in. And in dogs, we think this happens around 4 weeks of age. Everybody goes, "Oh, my puppy started walking 2 days." Yeah, yeah, it's an average, right? Around 4 weeks is about when dogs start walking. Yes, there's some that are a little earlier, some that are a little later. And when they're that age, they pretty much don't have any fear of new things. So they'll just walk up to anything. Godzilla, fine. They just walk up to it. They take it in. They don't know it's scary yet because they don't know what's new or not familiar yet because everything is new. So they just take it all in. And then over the next 4 weeks, that hesitance towards new things increases. So start to balk. You'll start to see fear towards new stuff. But at around 8 weeks, they will, if they see something or experience something entirely new that they have no familiarity, and it's not familiar smelling, it's not familiar looking, it's not familiar sounding, instead of exploring it, they'll turn around and run the other way. And so that 4 to 8 week period is really what we call the primary critical period in dogs. Now, a lot of people get their dogs at 8 weeks and they go, "Oh, it's all over." But that's not entirely true because with dogs, we can add a familiar thing to an unfamiliar thing and make it not completely new and keep that exploration going. So my favorite example of this is you get your puppy home, you're playing with it, everything's going great. You go outside for the first time and he sees the trash can with the flappy trash bag and oh my God, it's terrifying. He runs away. But if he knows you can go up and touch that trash can, and all of a sudden you've reduced its novelty. And now he can go explore it. And his brain's still actually developing pretty rapidly at that point, all the way up till 16 weeks. And you can still have a lot of familiarity happening. It's just you need this external thing to make it better. Whereas if the puppy was all by himself living in a garbage dump, that wasn't going to happen. But we can extend it by adding familiarity. So it's not you can't do anything past that point. It's just as far as evolution goes, what we're interested in is that 4 to 8 week period. And in wolves, there was a lot of hypothesizing that maybe the period was shorter. So one of my first studies was actually looking at the time period in wolves and seeing when their senses developed. And that seems a little sideways, but it, it was really interesting in that because basically we know when dog senses develop, dogs get all their senses on board by 4 weeks. Then they start walking and exploring. So that made a lot of sense. You can take everything in, then you go check it out. people were pretty sure that wolves were starting to walk at 2 weeks of age, and they'd suggested that they ended the critical period like at 3 weeks, which didn't ring true to me. I was like, how do we have this really social animal, this really curious animal who isn't having any time outside of the den to explore and take in new information? That doesn't make any sense to me. So
Mhm.
I was like, if that's true, their senses would need to develop at a different time. So instead of testing when their critical period happened, because that's really hard, I tested when their senses developed, and their senses develop at exactly the same time as dogs. And so if you go and look in the literature that's available, it looks like wolves are starting to walk at 2 weeks and starting to show this avoidance of novelty at 6 weeks. So still 4 week period, but shifted 2 weeks earlier. Now we consider the
Hmm.
senses, and we realize that dogs have that full 4 weeks, all their senses on board. Wolves are blind and deaf for the first 2 weeks. Then they start to hear and see things halfway through. So that means most of what they're basing everything, familiar or not, on is their sense of smell. And that's really where they're building everything
Mm.
from. So it makes them more nervous about new things and less able to generalize from one situation to another. So you can raise a wolf and a dog in exactly the same environment, and the dog is going to be less fearful of new things. They're going to be better able to generalize. They have an easier time forming social bonds with other species. It's their sort of
Mm.
superpower. We can get wolves to form social bonds with humans, but it is I can tell you from personal experience, it's an exhausting thing to do. And once you're done, they're not dogs. They are still more fearful. They are still have all their natural hunting behaviors. They're still wolves. They're still wild. I saw some comments on wild versus domestic. There was a little confusion there. There's wild wolves are all wild. Dogs are all domestic, but depending on what happens to them during their lives, they can be tame or untamed. So you can have a dog that you socialize during its lifetime will be friendly towards humans. A dog you don't socialize or it doesn't get around humans, you don't have to do it on purpose. They just have to be in the area, is going to be more fearful of people. Wolves, you have to do this really intensive early socialization process. It has to start before 3 weeks before their ears open, or else they're too scared and they just kind of have a reduced fear, but no social bonding. So you got to start before 3 weeks, 24 hours a day, as long as you can. Usually that's around 6 weeks. Then they start biting you in the ears while you're sleeping. It becomes really unpleasant. And so then after that point, it's all waking hours with them for, again, till around 16 weeks. And then still human contact needs to be daily for them to keep it up. And they still aren't going to generalize it to a lot of other people. It's mostly people that look like whoever socialized them. They're still very much wolves, but they will be socialized wolves, but they're still wild animals.
Mm.
So so those are some of the
Right.
big ones. The hunting behavior is another big one that I've done some work with. Wolves have this fully functional hunting behavior. Dogs have little bastardized versions of it in various forms, depending on whether they're working animals or not. And in your individual dog, it's kind of fun to figure out which pieces of it they have and figure out what toys go with that. A lot of them have dissecting bite, which is that like pulling the squeaker out of the toy thing. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, there's a lot of big behavioral differences. The fear and the social interaction are probably the two best studied differences, and the hunting behavior.
Thank you. Yeah, that's so fascinating. I just love the nuance there of, such a small developmental difference or short period of difference can have such huge behavioral effects.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and we
it's
can
it's
see that.
pretty it's pretty cool evolutionarily. So
Yeah.
that's one thing we're really working on now is trying to find the genetics under that small little shift because it's such a small
Yeah.
change. We can actually imagine that there's some small genetic changes that could accomplish that. So it actually changes how they're interacting with the
Yeah.
environment because there's no genes for behavior, but we could get genes for a small developmental shift, which then would completely
Hmm.
change their early development.
Yeah. Wow. So cool. So much more that we're going to learn in the near future. Um, I want to shift to some audience questions. So one, it kind of relates to something I wanted to ask you both about anyway, and it's getting more towards kind of the logistical side of your work and this intersection between the science and the advocacy. And I feel like both of you are kind of coming at some of the same issues, but from different sides or different spheres. So this could be interesting for both of you to answer. So someone was interested in how do you fund your work? First of all, like, can you talk about fundraising and the challenges involved with supporting your work, and then, what you hope to see in the near future as an outcome of your work with wolves, whether it's advocacy or research. So maybe we can kind of start there. Yeah, Anjali, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm super happy to jump in. Yeah, fundraising. It's always fun. No, there's I think it's been interesting because as I've grown the organization and just gone through the years of seeing how this works when it comes to fundraising and grant writing, the climate has changed a lot. So just with things like TikTok and Instagram and social media obviously becoming such a staple of all of our daily lives, I think that's really changed the model a lot, at least for us, and just when it comes to fundraising for the sanctuary and for the conservation work. So right now we really rely on social media for our fundraising. So whether it's directing people to our website for memberships or donations, or it's fundraising using the fundraising tool directly on Instagram. That is really the majority. That's the bulk of how we fund our conservation research or field work, whether that's cameras, whether that's non-lethal tools for ranchers, or the sanctuary, which is just daily care, food, which is very expensive. They eat a lot of meat.
Mhm.
And we do get some donations, but we still have to we still have to fill in a lot of the gaps. Veterinary care, our education programs for kids. So there's a lot, and it is difficult, especially the economy in general is not it's not great right now. So people are struggling. So we really try to stay consistent on social media. That has helped us a lot. And I think that's been key. But I think there's a lot of different ways to do it depending on what your focus is and what your mission is. And then you said, how do we want to see that in the future, right? Benefit. Yeah. So really, I mean,
Mhm.
I would say our goal right now is definitely to push forward wildlife policy for greater protections for wolves, starting in California. So right now, we are on a couple of bills, but the most prominent one is SB 1135, and that is with Senator Kathryn Blakespear. And so we are basically, she introduced a bill to get wildlife coexistence and wolf coexistence funded in California. So for us, our fundraising will go into advocacy and awareness efforts for that. So that is a lot of content. That is a lot of education. And the sanctuary is a part of that as well, because every time we share our stories of our wolf dogs, we connect that back to, the bills and the wildlife advocacy that we're pushing. So I would say getting these policies, getting some of these bills passed, that is how I would like to see all of our groundwork
Mhm.
materialize, because at the end of the day, policy is what impacts whether wolves, as you know, Kristen, are protected or not. And then really just expanding our educational outreach. We need funding to do that. We need personnel, we need educational materials. I think that the youth, they are the most important key and piece to conservation. you know, Without that, they dictate what happens in the future and they hold the keys to the future. So we really have made our coexistence programming, uh, kids and youth have been a big staple and a big part of that, because we're stuck in our ways, a lot of us, and it's been really, really amazing to see how some of our programs, we have programs that are every month. So we're able to see the growth and the engagement, and some of these kids, as they go throughout the program, now they want to go study wolves, now they want to be wildlife lawyers, or environmentalists or scientists. So yeah, I guess like those would be our dream scenarios, and how our fundraising can really benefit us. And then just lifelong care for our wolf dogs. I think a lot of people forget about that when it comes to animal sanctuaries, right? They see the initial rescue, and people are very, very amazing and willing to jump in and donate for an initial rescue, if that makes sense. But then they don't realize this animal is here for the rest of their life. This animal might not be able to get rehomed for multiple reasons. And so that's, every single day, the care that goes into it.
Yeah.
And they can live. I heard of a wolf that lived to 21 years old at another sanctuary. So, they're here forever and they have beautiful habitats and they're happy. But yeah, it's just continuously caring for them. So that's part of what the fundraising goes to as well, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's important to understand everything that goes into this work that you is often behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And
Um,
yeah, go ahead,
yeah,
Kathy.
our funding, the funding landscape has changed quite a bit recently in science. So we used to
Yeah.
be able to apply to national grants, and that's just not a thing anymore. It's just not worth it. So even if you get the funding, even if you get approved to get funding, you probably aren't going to get the money. So we're very much looking at private grants and things like that. While the behavior end of things tends to be less expensive, I used to just kind of limp along on small, tiny grants. That's not true for the genetic side of thing, which is really where we need to push stuff at this point. Because we've done a lot of behavior stuff, and connecting the two, the environment and the genes, is really where it's at. And while the cost of that has come down quite a lot in recent years, it's still pretty expensive, especially when we want to get large numbers of animals in these studies. Most studies looking at dogs and wolves in the past have been, 5, 10 animals. Our paper that we're working on now with wolf dog hybrids, we had 90. So it's still small for people working with like um, fruit flies or mice, but for wolves and wolf dogs, that it's kind of enormous, and it adds up. So yeah, mostly we're looking at private grantors at this point. We don't have a lot of funding for this particular work. Most of the funding in the lab comes in for stuff like cancer research and stuff like that, where there's a lot more funding opportunities. In the biology world, dogs aren't really considered real animals, so that's something we've been working hard on trying to get people to see them in more of an evolutionary light. Um, but we'd like to, we have grants out now. We're really trying to get money to do more work looking specifically at this timing of the critical period of socialization and attach it to its genetic underpinnings. We have a paper hopefully that will be coming out later this year on the wolf dog hybrid work
Mm.
we did. And we did find some really promising genetic links to behavioral differences within that population, and we'd like to follow up with that, take that to the next level as well. So yeah, we have lots of projects we'd like to do, many things. But yeah, we're
Yes.
right now we're throwing accelerometers on dog and wolf pups whenever we can to see when they start walking, and looking at the development of their response towards novelty and stuff like that, and just kind of limping along with whatever money we can get.
Yeah, well, thank you for your ongoing work. I know that the funding landscape, both for nonprofits and research institutions, is not very encouraging right now. So y'all are doing amazing work, and I hope we can continue to see that into the future. Um, My goodness, we have some really great questions. I can't believe how quickly this hour is going up. I just want to reiterate that we will have a follow-up email and we'll have some great actions people can take. A lot of the questions here are about what can I do? Where can I volunteer? So I will follow up with links, including from our folks on this call. Um, for here, I'll try to summarize maybe a few. There's some really great like philosophical questions. So maybe we can start to wrap up thinking about from each of your perspectives, like what is something that you would love for, the public, the average person to know who isn't super familiar with wolves, something about them that's it could be a misconception or just something that we're not super aware of that you think is, really integral to our understanding of that species or how we relate to it. And then from there, thinking about, what would you envision in the near future in terms of the status of wolves and the human relationship, the human connection to wolves? So I know that's very big and broad, but perhaps there's some little things there you could tease out that come to mind.
Yeah, I would love to jump in. Just, I guess there's a lot of misconceptions for sure, but I think one that is important to highlight that I think is starting to get some more traction is the alpha male and just the alpha myth that the
Mm.
biologist David Meck, who coined the term, has been working to debunk it now after his findings. And I think that is a really important piece to highlight. I think that people for a long time believed that there was an alpha male or an alpha wolf that was the pack leader, that was the dominant one, that was the biggest, strongest one, overpowering everybody. And, that's just not the case. When you read the studies, when you watch the documentaries, when you do the research, you see that wolf packs are families. There is so much we can learn from them.
Mhm.
Wolves have made me a better person. Wolf dogs have made me a better person. And just watching, even though my wolf dogs here are partially domesticated and they're, in captivity, I do see them and then I see videos of the wild wolves. And every time, I mean, it doesn't matter how many times I see them interact, it melts my heart because they care about each other so much. They care about the pack. They are so selfless. And, there's always nuances, but I think overall, wolves are family animals. I think that's something that's really important to remember. And I guess just the takeaway, what I would want for people to see about wolves is that they are the first animal that we domesticated. They were our first non-human friends. The most ancient connection we have with any animal is with a wolf. And there's a reason why we feel so connected to them. There's a reason why women feel so connected to them. I think the takeaway is that we need to stop seeing them as the enemy. And, the bigger picture, the bigger message is we are all a pack. We all share this earth together, and they were our first friends. And so I hope just we can all move forward with, lessons from the wolf with that, and just remembering that we're all here together, and we're all here to take care of each other. Yeah.
It's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, since Anjali tackled the dominance thing, that's a good one. Um, I guess I'd say my big one would be that wolves are not neither inherently evil nor inherently good. They're wolves. They're doing their thing. They're out there living the life they evolved to live, and we're the ones who are putting those judgments on them. So there's certainly situations where, it's awful to see your calf get killed by a pack of wolves, but it's also we know how to avoid that. We know how to live in the same environment with them and make sure that doesn't happen and make sure that they're focusing on their natural prey. The trick it's up to us to make sure that that conflict doesn't happen. They're just doing their thing, and we threw a tasty snack in their way. So, but we can make sure that they don't think that's a tasty snack and they focus on their own food. And they're also not inherently angels. They're predators. They do kill stuff. That is how they survive. You can't go up and hug a wolf. That's a bad idea. Don't do that, please. Gets everybody in trouble. So, so they're wild animals that are living their lives and they've evolved to live that way. And I think we can appreciate them for that. And I think we can learn a lot from them, as Anjali was saying, both about our own lives and how to live better with wildlife and share this planet with those animals that have not evolved to require us. Um, and yeah, so I think that kind of mindset is what I hope for people. And I forgot the second half of the question.
I mean, I think you pretty much covered it,
Great.
basically what you would want to see in the future in terms of our relationship with wolves and our understanding of them. So, yeah. Um, is there anything else that either of you would like to add that's come to mind that I haven't covered briefly?
Just thank you again. I think
Yes,
this is
thank you.
amazing, and it's such a great way to bring people together. And just as we were talking, I saw some of the chat messages popping up, and it was just
Hmm.
that was like my favorite part, besides getting to talk to you ladies, seeing people from all over the world with all these amazing things that they're doing, sharing and connecting. Like we said before we went live, wolves bring people together, right? So I think that's
Yes,
really amazing. So thank you guys for doing this.
Yes, thank you.
of
This has been
course.
fun.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I'm just going to, I mentioned that I wanted to share an action that everyone can take. So, first of all, thank you both for being here. I feel like this conversation just flew by and we could talk for several more hours about this. So, I feel like this was just the beginning of a conversation. And thank you everyone for joining. Like I said, I'll have a follow-up email sharing links, more information, answering more questions. The chat was so active and we appreciate that. We have folks on our team monitoring the chat, so we see all of your contributions. Thank you so much for being engaged. If you haven't already and you would like to help us take action here in British Columbia, you can use this QR code or you can just go to the Pacific Wild homepage and you'll see an action alert. So basically, we're asking folks to send a letter to our premier, as well as two of the ministers that are involved with elements of caribou and wolf management. And so we have a letter writing tool that makes it really easy, and you can express why you feel that killing wolves is not the right option and that instead the government should be protecting caribou habitat. So you can follow that link. You can always reach out to us if you have questions. And uh, lastly, I encourage you, if you aren't already signed up for our email list, you can do that with the link on the left, and you'll learn about more webinars, more events, all of the good things we're doing here. And of course, we always appreciate donations. We love to offer these events for free, and we'll continue doing so. But of course, donations, as we heard during this webinar, are incredibly important, whether it's for advocacy or research or what have you. But just being here today and engaging with us means a lot and goes a long way. And we really appreciate that. I want to acknowledge once again the amazing expertise of Anjali and Kathryn. Thank you so much for being here. And we look forward to continuing our conversation and offering everyone here on the call ways to participate, volunteer, take action, and learn more. Thank you all so much, and you'll hear from us soon.
Thank you guys.
Thanks.